Hip hop is an art form rooted very, very firmly in innovation. And so even when the have-nots became the have-it-alls, they still remain true to that alternative way of thinking and those innovative attempts.
Welcome to a brand new episode of Starts at the Top, our podcast about leading differently. I'm Zoe Amma.
And I'm Paul Thomas. Our podcast exists to help leaders and their teams understand what they need to do differently today to prepare for the world of tomorrow. We started Starts at the Top as a podcast about digital disruption, but we soon realised that leaders were telling us about something far more important and urgent, about how traditional ways of leading had changed forever.
We make it our mission to speak to leaders who are carving out new ways of leading, and we cover topics from emerging tech to inclusion, from remote work to mental health and climate change. Basically, all the subjects that today's leaders need to be across in 2024.
And our podcast isn't about shiny corporate case studies, it's about lessons learned and progress made the hard way, and crucially, how that can inspire others.
And today's episode is a case in point. We share our interview with Nels Abbey, banker turned author of the Hip Hop MBA, a new book subtitled Lessons in Cutthroat Capitalism from Raps Moguls. This was a real treat. It was great fun chatting to Nels, and I really enjoyed reading this book. It was absolutely right up my street, having been a hip hop fan for years. And I know you love this book too, Paul.
Yeah, it was real fun, wasn't it? I think regular listeners will obviously know that we're both big music fans. So the mix of business and music, I think that was our favourite book, or one of my favourite books of last year or the year before that we reviewed was, again, a case of music crossing over with business. But I think it was great fun, and I think he was a great guest to speak to. The book seems to have made quite a splash as well. He was interviewed on Nihal's show on BBC 5 Live, and he tells a story about how he met Nihal at the beginning of the interview. I think it's really refreshing to look at business strategy from an alternative perspective, and I found myself laughing out loud just as often as I found myself nodding along in agreement.
Yeah, definitely. And it really made us think about how that traditional idea of what success looks like can be quite limited in many ways, can't it? And not that inclusive. And Nels's book is a really refreshing challenge to that. So today's interview is a really refreshing take on all these different ideas about strategy and how to innovate. And it's always good to look at strategy through a different lens, and Nels's book will certainly help you do that, as we were saying. And talking of different lenses, have you seen the story about the photographs taken or not taken at last night's Met Gala?
I have. Yeah, this is the story about how AI fooled the internet once again, and even fooled Katy Perry's mum.
Yes, that's right. So photos of Katy Perry, Rihanna and Dua Lipa surfaced today, and we're recording on Tuesday the 7th of May, and showing them all at the gala wearing amazing outfits, only for AI spotting sleuths to identify that Katy and Rihanna weren't even there, and that Dua Lipa was there but wearing an entirely different outfit. And we will link to that story in the show notes. Now, this story is quite kind of fun, and it shows how AI's capabilities are growing, but there's a very serious point behind it, because this is something where even Katy Perry's mum was fooled by the images, apparently. So actually, there's some quite serious implications, I think, here for the fact that these photos were out there, people were deceived by them, they did crop up online, and there are implications for this year's elections, for example, and how the truth is becoming something that's much more questionable and much more malleable. And the fact that it's so easy to put these photos out there now and fool a lot of people means that the upcoming elections are going to be much more difficult and much more fraught than they normally would be.
Yeah, this is millions of people that were sharing these images today. And
Shocking,
obviously
isn't
that
it?
grew. Yeah, and it grew and grew as more people realised what they were seeing wasn't quite right. And obviously Katy Perry's reaction to it was quite fun. But then it does call to mind in the article that we'll share mentions things like Donald Trump being photographed or not photographed with black voters, for example, to win hearts and minds with voters that just wouldn't think twice about voting for Trump. Fake audio of Sadiq Khan that was shared earlier this year as well. So it really is going to be a bit of a minefield for us as we go through the next couple of years, and particularly this year, where a lot of the world's population is going to vote, it's going to be really, really hard to keep up.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting reading the article, exactly as you were saying. So, one image of Katy Perry in a floral gown has actually been viewed over 13 million times on Twitter. And it just shows how, if you put a sufficiently convincing piece of content out there, it will get shared, it will go viral. And actually, it makes it much harder now to work out what is true and what isn't. And that in itself can start to influence how people perceive a story.
A bit like the pictures of Kate, though. Apparently, the super sleuths were on the case, and they said that they noticed half a photographer's head missing in the background. I think there was a red carpet from a previous Met Gala from a couple of years ago. So the signs are there if you look for them. And then helpfully, when we were discussing whether to discuss this or not, I found another article today where OpenAI, one of the big movers and shakers in the AI space, have said today that they are going to share their new deepfake detector with a small group of disinformation researchers so that they can start to test this tool in real world situations and look for ways that they can improve things. And I hadn't realized, and I think we wanted to share today, that that means that OpenAI are going to join tech giants like Google and Meta on a steering committee for the Coalition of Content Provenance and Authenticity, or C2PA, which sounds a little bit like a Star Wars droid. But it's good to know that these organizations are actually getting their heads together and trying to help us figure out exactly where their products and their AI may be being used to try and pull the wool over our eyes.
So this is interesting, isn't it? So is this going to be a bit like the watermark of accurate content that people have been talking about for a while?
Yeah, and they actually say that they will start to produce a watermark so that you can be sure. And we had, as you mentioned, we've had people or guests on this podcast, haven't we, talking about disinformation and how to spot it. So it would be interesting to know whether that tool is going to be shared with some of those organisations in the UK as well.
Absolutely. Well, I'm sure that's something we can follow up on another episode. It'd be good to get maybe one of those guests back on to talk about this issue. So it's only going to get more murky and more complex this year, isn't it?
It is indeed. And who knows? How can anyone be sure that it's actually you and I talking today? I mean, I have quite a sore throat today. My voice has changed, or has it?
Maybe you're actually out of
anyway
tonight, Paul.
Yeah. Anyway, so now for our conversation with Nels Abbey.
We are super excited to have Nels Abbey on Starts at the Top today. Nels Abbey is a British-Nigerian Shikiri writer, broadcaster, media executive and satirist based in London. Prior to moving into media, he worked in financial services, principally for the US investment mammoth BlackRock. Nels is also the founder of Uppity, the intellectual playground. We're here today to talk about his second book, The Hip Hop MBA, which Paul and I have recently read and absolutely loved. Nels, welcome to Starts at the Top. We are thrilled to have you here. Thank you for coming.
I am even more thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, well, we're delighted that you're here. And before we get started, Paul, I know you wanted to talk about hip hop generally and our love of it as a musical genre.
Well, I think it's important when you're doing a conversation like this to establish your credentials or your lack of credentials in this space. And I just thought, on our last conversation, Zoe and I just ended it by saying, we're really both hip hop fans, and I don't think we really knew that about each other. So I thought we would share. So I would love to know more, and this has been a sort of an education for me. So I'm going to delve into a bit more. But I think, like all good white people, my introduction to hip hop came through the Beastie Boys.
Absolutely.
But then because the Beastie Boys then introduced me to Q-Tip, who I just, to this day, I think my favourite voice in hip-hop is Q-Tip. I just like his tone. I started to listen to Tribe Called Quest and stuff like that and started to find a bit more of an in to proper hip-hop. And then I have to say, just recently, my son has been massively into rap and to hip-hop as well. And my proudest moment as a parent in the last 12 months or so was taking him to Rough Trade and then seeing his Instagram post afterwards where he had taken photos of all the rap vinyl, and is plotting his first purchases. So yeah, I wanted to establish myself as a fan, but not really a very knowledgeable fan. But that was my route in. Zoe, how about you?
Oh, I'm a long-standing hip hop fan, not with the same kind of deep expertise that you have, Nels. But when I saw this book, I was so excited. So I grew up in multicultural Southeast London. I'm half Chinese, half English, and I grew up listening to Dre and obviously Snoop as well. And then more recently, I guess some of the new generation of hip hop I really enjoyed. So people like Loyal Kana, obviously Run the Jewels. I absolutely love Run the Jewels, and I really like Killer Mike's new album. And there's just so much to explore there, and that's why when we read your book, it really made me think about the different layers around innovation and creativity and entrepreneurialism that just don't get talked about often enough.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's really interesting to hear how you both got into the culture and both got into the actual music. Similar to Paul, Q-Tip had the same effect on me too. I was familiar, of course, with rappers. Those Hammer and Vanilla Ice were enormous. Of course, when I was quite young, I think Vanilla Ice did one of the soundtracks for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movie at the time. It was actually Q-Tip and the Tribe Called Quest that really got me into hip hop. There's a song called "Check the Rhyme," and it was on ITV's The Chart Show. This was 1990, and the song, nothing had ever captured me like that before in my life. And I mean, I recorded it on my VHS, and I can tell you, I watched that hundreds of times conservatively. Just watch, rewind, and here we are today. So there we go.
And this has all been the inspiration for this amazing book. And it's so interesting hearing about the genesis of this book, how it came out of an idea you originally had in 2001, which came about because of a conversation you had outside the Cost Cutter on the Harrow Road. Can you tell us more about that?
So, for those of you who have not been plagued with being born or raised in West London, I'll describe the scene for you. There's West London is a very, very mixed. It's a place of very mixed fortune, like much of London. But this part of West London, very much so. So there's a Harrow Road is one of these roads. Well, actually, one of the longest roads in the UK. It's a road that just refuses to gentrify. And then there's Elgin Avenue, which is actually one of the wealthier roads possibly in the UK. And but there's a junction where the two of them meet, and there's a Cost Cutter, which used to be a 7-Eleven right outside of it. It is pretty much where all the deviants are at night. It's just all the deviants, all the miscreants, all the people who come out at night. They just seem to congregate around there at night. So, of course, myself and Nihal from Radio 5 Live were there at 2 a.m. in the morning. And I'd never met Nihal in my life. We just knew him, that he was a figure from TV, somebody we'd seen on TV or so on the radio. And then myself and my best friend, we popped into the Costco, then we were heading home. And then we just started speaking to Nihal. We just started speaking to him. And then, of course, as always happens with hip hop, as happened with the three of us just now, we just started talking hip hop. And we started talking UK hip hop. And then suddenly he started really just speaking about, and I didn't quite get the So Solid Crew wave at first, because I was a purist hip hop fan. I always loved that Tribe Called Quest boom bap sound. So when 21 Seconds by So Solid, which was a part garage, part hip hop collective, came about, it didn't capture my ear as much as it did many other people at the time. But what was really, really fascinating was just speak to Nihal about it. Nihal then said, look, do you understand how great a leader, Mega Man, who was the guy who put together So Solid and dreamt of it whilst he was in prison as a 17-year-old, and got all the kids from his estate together and built a 40-person rap collective and then and took them to the top of the charts. And he just said to me, do you know how great a leader is, that you're telling one person you're the promotion guy, you're the radio person, you're the rapper, you're the ladies' man, you're the lady, and just so on and so forth, getting all these people together and creating an omelette out of them and it hitting the top of the charts in Britain at a time where British hip hop was a joke. And at the time, British hip hop was a joke to the point where Robbie Williams was probably the most famous British rapper at the time. But what he said about Mega Man right there and then sparked thought. It planted a thought in my mind, because he just spoke of Mega Man as a corporate leader. And I was like, that's very interesting way to see it. And from 2001, just walking away from there, I thought, so one day I'm going to expand on that concept of these rap figures as being the business people that they really are and the business thinkers they are. And that was 2001, and here we are today.
That's amazing. And that idea, that sort of shift in thinking about leadership that that conversation with Nihal engendered, did that sort of stay in the back of your mind as you were, because you went on to work in the city,
Yeah.
didn't you, after that?
It did, because it did more than stay in the back of my mind. It made me look at rap music. So the interesting thing about the typical rap music fan is that it really is it's a creative endeavor. It's an endeavor of love, also in terms of rap music is, but it's also very, very business in a way that perhaps other parts of popular culture just weren't until quite recently. It was almost as if a rap music fan was a budding rapper, was a budding music executive, or they had some sort of deep interest they wanted to know. So it's almost like, okay, what's this person's first week numbers looking like? The number of albums they sold in their first week. Who's at the top of the chart? So we always had the chart shows or so, but the chart shows never really said to us, or like you watch Top of the Pops, it never said to you how many records you were selling, how many records this person was selling to get there. So you had no indication. There was no really, it wasn't much depth. But rap music was quite clear that people really wanted to know that, okay, this person's big, but is he as big as this person? Does he sell as many records as this person? That is Master P, who is releasing dozens of albums a month, selling, making as much money as Puff Daddy. It became very, very business orientated, and it just, again, it grew my interest in business. And it also, so when I went into the corporate world, so many of the business ideas and alternative ways of thinking that I went into with it is things I just learned from rappers. But I just put it in my own language, and sometimes you make me look stupid, but sometimes you see the eyeballs light up like, oh, that's a very good idea. I've been so, well, you should have paid attention to RZA from Wu-Tang. You would have had that idea yourself. And then we go from there. So, yeah.
Amazing.
It's interesting because
Absolutely.
I was making some notes earlier on the book, and I sort of said to Zoe yesterday that there's an idea forming in the back of my mind, and it was this idea that you do cover in the book. Actually, there's a section called Evolution where it talks about change, and I just wondered what you saw then and what you're seeing now, or what we're seeing now going into the workplace, the new generation, Gen Z, going into the workplace, causing an awful lot of disruption because they seem to have that same approach. They're not a slave to the establishment. They're not
No,
sort of
no, no.
using the sort of the established proving grounds that we probably all went through, that you felt you had to go through when you entered the corporate world.
Yeah.
They're sort of approaching it in a different way. And you said in the evolution section, there's sort of three choices around change, and there's one is to be passively changed by the times,
Yeah.
two to be actively changing with the times, and then three to aggressively change the times. And it
Yeah.
feels to me that Gen Z, in the same way that hip hop perhaps is taking that third approach, or a blend of the two and the three, to go into business and work in a slightly different way, challenge the norms.
Yeah, I think there's probably I should have added it to the book. I'll update in the paper. There's actually a fourth option, which is die. Don't change it, just fall off, essentially. And I think that's it. So it changes the only consistent in life. And I do find that you go into the corporate world, even when I speak to my nieces and nephews, it's a very different generation. So if I look at myself, when I went into the corporate world, I was very much emulating the guys who I saw to a degree. My mannerism of dress, my mannerism of speech. When I think of different, some of my friends or so, when I went into banking, so one of my friends who started the same day with me went in there. He was a working class guy, went in there with his hair literally combed all the way back like Gordon Gekko, because that was his reference to financial services. So it was from Wall Street, and then he just thought that would be it. And you still sit, and that was that environment. But then I was at a organization, I'll shout them out, it's called Golin London, which is a PR firm. I spoke to them the other day. I went to go see them the other day, and it was a very, very unique situation where all of the people were just casually dressed, completely relaxed, bringing their full selves to the office. And you're right, but they're not that loyal to the system as, say, we had to be. They really, truly, these are internet natives. And so somebody born around 9/11 is 23 years old this year. That's a graduate. So somebody born literally on the day Twin Towers struck, so that person's graduating from university right now. So, and I think most of us who are my age or so, you remember where you were when 9/11 actually happened. But they're bringing a very, very internet native, internet language and a different way of, because sometimes more compassionate, sometimes more sensitive, but certainly way more alternative to how we would have done things in the past. And I was slightly different to the generation before me. I remember when I started off, a lot of the guys who were leading the department were people who'd been in the same firm or the same department for the last 20, 30 years. And that was just how it was. Whereas my generation came on board and we just cracked the code that, no, you don't stay anywhere too long. You stay anywhere too long, so you start to get you start to decline in terms of actual pay. This generation, it's so unbelievably aggressively different. Even you think like Bitcoin, which I still haven't wrapped my head around, or all these other bits and bobs that they do. They're looking for what's the next coin to buy. So when I started off in the corporate world, we were looking for where to buy fake Rolexes to impress girls at the bar later on that evening or so. That's what we use the internet for. So it's a very, very different ball game, a very, very different type of thinking. And also, I salute their aggressiveness in terms of entrepreneurialism. They are smart people.
So, speaking of those alternatives, we were really gripped by the opening of the book, where you begin with the discussion about why Warren Buffett is more frequently cited as an example of success than Jay-Z.
Yep.
Can you tell us why we all need to know more about Jay-Z's entrepreneurial successes?
So Jay-Z is a very unique character. He's a unique, interesting person. He's you've heard many an African American story, their nightmare tale about how they grew up in the projects. They got into the drug trade, the washing up. You heard any number of rap albums, you would actually hear that. But what Jay-Z took from those things was he took literally the byproducts of economic dysfunction, of economic pain, and quite literally made champagne out of it. So if you take a look at Jay-Z, he was a very calculating man from the beginning. He knew he had that talent for music in a way that was popular at the time. He couldn't sell it. He couldn't actually get anybody to be convinced to offer him a record deal, so they founded their own record deal, complete with money that they earned from the substance business. I call it that, essentially. So money they earned from the substance business, they reinvest that into rap music, which was actually super duper common at the time. If you go back to the origins of many of the hip hop labels, they were founded with alternative pharmaceutical proceeds, and that was what was happening at the time. Jay-Z was in that situation too, and it was really fascinating. There was one moment where he was in an interview with Warren Buffett, and he pointed out there was a raid upon what was essentially their drug den at the time. There was a raid on them, and they pretty much took down everybody. So one of his best friends was taken down and was sentenced to 13 years in prison. But he then pointed out that he got lucky that he was actually in London at the time recording a rap album with Jaz-O at the time. So it says if you go on the internet and Google the word Jay-Z Willesden, you'll see Jay-Z in a 190 Benz around 1987, 88 or so. That if he wasn't there, he would have been serving a significantly long death sentence. But the key thing about Jay-Z is that he came from nothing whatsoever, but he had to learn. He has no formal qualifications, no nepotism they could lean into. No, oh, my dad knows my dad or my uncle or so know this guy, they can link me into that. There was nothing. He made something out of nothing. Whereas Warren Buffett was pretty much a nepo baby. He pretty much was somebody who benefited from the prevailing order of the day. He went into an industry that always benefited people like him. He was definitely a smart man, no doubt about it, because there's many people. There's a reason why investment managers are not dumb people. Nepotism will only take you so far. You've got to know your stuff too at the same time. You have to be lucky. You have to be very, very smart, or you have to be a monkey with a pin, and one of those two also will work out for you as an investment manager, as an asset allocator. But Jay-Z, so just key difference between the two of them is that Warren Buffett is, of course, worth 100 times more than Jay-Z is, but Warren Buffett went from riches to riches. Jay-Z went from rags to riches. Jay-Z made something from absolutely nothing. He's a capitalism success story, whereas Warren Buffett is a capitalism continuity story, a story of which my dad had this, that he's passed on to me, I'll pass on to my sons, and so on and so forth.
We see there's a great sort of shift and trend towards influencer marketing today. And it's just that question of the value of rap artists and bringing their audiences to those big brands. There's several examples, quite a few examples in the book of the likes of Apple and McDonald's and all sorts of different organizations that have benefited from this in the past. I really like the one about Sprite and 7-Up, because I hadn't actually realised that my kids didn't really know what 7-Up was, and it was Sprite that was has taken over. But there's some really great examples in the book. Can you share a few of your favourites?
7-Up was the market leader in the lemonade space for much of the 80s or so. They had this little character, which in its own right looked a little bit hip-hop-ish. It was called Fido Dido, and it was just a little bag, almost like it was a stick character they would use to market that, and that became their famous symbol around the world. And so 7-Up was pretty much synonymous with lemonade. That was it. That was the lemonade brand. Then Sprite, of course, is acquired as part of the Coca-Cola bottling company. They purchased Coca-Cola. They purchased Sprite as a brand, or they own Sprite as a brand. And then they're looking for the way to actually market Sprite. And then one thing leads to another, they decide upon hip hop. And for generations, successive generations, they would pick rappers to be the face of Sprite. A Tribe Called Quest did an advert for them. KRS-One and his former rival MC Shan did an advert for them. Obey Your First pretty much became, if you could not open up a rap music magazine or so many different publications without seeing rappers actually posing by the actual logo, so or posing by the actual slogan, that actual logo, or as that slogan or that actual branding element that they had there too. And hip hop just became back and forth of Sprite everywhere. And suddenly, before you knew it, a couple of decades later, 7 Up, honestly, lemonade is probably the only drink I drink, and the only drink I drink outside of water or so. And we're in August right now. We're in April, I beg your pardon, not in August. And I don't think I've had a 7 Up this decade when you think about it. But Sprite, yeah, I've had one this week without a shadow of a doubt about it. And I think that was the power of the actual marketing there. But it goes broader than that too. If you look at it, there's what I call the 3 E's endorsement. In the early days of rap music or so, the rappers would sing about, say, Adidas, or they would sing about a particular brand, Tommy Hilfiger, etc., or they'll wear it. Particularly Tommy Hilfiger, be it Snoop Dogg or Grand Poobah or Mary J. Blige or Aaliyah. At the time, they would wear Tommy Hilfiger, and it would really quickly elevate the brand of say the companies that they endorsed. And then the brand sometimes would give them either money or they'd just give them clothing, and that would be that. If you go back to Notorious B.I.G., for example, listen to Hypnotize on the second verse, Notorious B.I.G. shouted out so many fashion brands. It was pretty crazy when you think about it. Fashion brands at the time that I hadn't really heard of, and fashion brands at the time I probably still either couldn't afford or wouldn't want to afford. My mortgage wouldn't permit me to actually go out and purchase. So there was the endorsement deal. Then from there, it went from endorsement to almost like a degree of empowerment, that you had For Us By Us, which was FUBU, which became a fashion brand, which was actually indigenous hip hop fashion brand, which was very, very much not just, it was a hip hop fashion brand, but it spoke to the ethos of hip hop, the baggy clothing, the attitude, and so on and so forth. And you had a slew of those for quite a long time. Carl Kanai, Fubu, Mark Echo to a certain degree was in the same vein. And then you had Equity, where quite literally the rappers went from having maybe their own fashion brands to literally owning a major slice of, say, a corporation on an equity basis. So this is when Kanye West comes in and saves Adidas, and Adidas pretty much is their main cash cow. Or when Kanye West again goes to the Gap and does the exact same. Does well. I don't think the deal actually rolled out in the end. But the day he signed with the Gap to actually become pretty much one of their main fashion designers, their share price went through the roof. That they hit a 10-year high for the Gap. And then you then have Dr. Dre with Beats by Dre, which goes on to be purchased by Apple, and so on and so forth. So this evolution from endorsement to empowerment to equity as in ownership has been proven really successful for rappers, but it's equally proven just as successful for the businesses that they've actually done deals with too.
And that's fascinating, isn't it? Because one of my biggest takeaways from the book was about those enormous challenges in hip hop artists' backstories, and how what they've overcome is actually in some ways as important as what they go on to achieve and what success looks like. So can you tell us about how that challenge, that journey that they've all faced, how that might then influence the really unique way they approach business and also how they innovate?
Innovation is, they say creation. Well, innovation, but using it almost loosely as a synonym for creation in this situation here. But sometimes people say hip hop doesn't really create anything; it just innovates. It takes elements from different places that have already been created and throws them together and creates something, or innovates into something very, very different. Innovation is pretty much hip hop's salvation. It's pretty much the basis of hip hop altogether. it's just, even when you look at it, the record player became the turntable. The old soul records became pretty much new records as a result of sampling or so. The fact that they didn't have many of them didn't have formal instrumentation training or so, or how to play particular records, became the basis in which the music was actually made. So they were taking other people's older records, resampling them, remaking them. And then even when you actually look at the concept of rapping itself, well, to a certain degree, you are harmonizing, but it's not like you're not a soprano or anything else, or not one of those elite singers that anybody would actually think of. In fact, in the past, many people didn't even consider it music in the early days. They just considered it gibberish, talking over records, whereas it is absolutely music. And of course, it is absolutely poetry at the exact same time. So hip hop is an art form rooted very, very firmly in innovation. And it's an innovation that's rooted, of course, itself in deprivation. So it's the fact that they had not, this is the have nots finding ways to circumvent their lack of privilege in order to actually create something that was, or innovate things that were very, very new, very, very different. And so even when the have nots became the have it alls, they still remain true to that alternative way of thinking and that those innovative attempts. Even to this very day, even certain things that I think of how they created brands. So MTV is no secret now. So you ever watch a show called MTV Cribs? MTV had this idea in which they would actually show people around the rich and famous homes of musicians and rappers and everything else. We now know that those homes were actually just rented mansions for the day or so. They would rent a couple of Ferraris in the mansion, and then that would be it. They'll show up for the day, film the episode, and then leave. If there was any innovation, that shows when Redman actually showed up, actually showed them his real house. So he just showed, I just live in this 2-bedroom shack over here. I'm really not doing it. I'm just about managing. And that became the most magical episode of the whole thing. And I think that's what hip hop became, essentially, just taking those things or so, and just moving it forward from there. If I think of again of the person I used as innovation, become quite a dark character at the moment. So Kanye West has, of course, gone down a very, very dark streak in terms of his anti-Semitism and racism in general. So and far right wingery, which doesn't make any sense. I think it's a cry for. I think he's having a bit of a mental health crisis, but it's there. It's offensive. But in terms of actual innovation, in terms of hip hop, also he was pretty much a genius. Everything he did was just because hip hop had innovated to a particular point of prominence at that point when he emerged to the fore around the late 90s, early 2000s. But he took it to another level. He was just thinking in very, very different levels. And the things, so for example, in terms of how he approached his clothing design or so, they look like rags. Some of them look like rags. If you wear the trainers, they're some of the most comfortable trainers ever. The Yeezys are some of the most comfortable trainers ever, to a point where right now I'm wearing a pair of Asics, and they are literally modeled upon the Yeezys. That's what I feel anyways. I'm wearing the Nimbus 25s, if anybody wishes to know. They're modeled on the Yeezys, which they look quite chunky and bulky, but my God, are they comfortable. So it's taken a bit of premium on style, but a lot more premium on comfort. So they became market leading shoes. If you look at what say Dr. Dre did with the headphones were costing an expensive pair of headphones would cost you about £150. Beats by Dre comes out, and an average pair of headphones from his range will cost about 300 something pounds, and they went everywhere. They went absolutely everywhere, really, really, really quickly.
The book got us thinking about this sort of musical magpieism that I think hip hop is built on. Seeing something shiny, taking it, building on it, creating something new that the artist then shares with the world to great success. And Zoe and I sort of see this with some of the leaders we talk to, that there are those leaders and people that keep finding the shiny new thing and making a success of it. But also, when you talked about Warren Buffett at the beginning, particularly in business, there seems to be a much narrower template for success. Do you think we're too restricted in the way that we view success in the business world? And what might we learn from the world of hip hop?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Thank you for it. I think that we are very, very restricted in terms of how we view success and the respect we put on different avenues towards success. So in terms of the actual restriction side of things, I feel that there's almost a convention in this is what being successful looks like. This is how you attain that level of societal celebration as somebody who's really come up with really good business ideas and put those ideas into into action and made them and persisted to the point where they've become very, very fruitful. So in hip hop, you've seen that time and time. You're seeing it today as we speak in real time. You're seeing it time and time again where people with literally nothing or no way to really cultivate wealth have just really, as you point out, magpies have just picked whatever they can, and not always shiny, sometimes really just in the rough diamond stuff, and just found ways to make it work, found ways to just keep recreating. There's one young rapper I'll give who I think might do well for himself in many, many years to come as a mogul. His name is La Russell. Which is spelled La as in LA and then Russell, but it's all one word. It's from the Bay Area in California. He is completely independent, has a very, very dynamic way of doing business and a great business philosophy. He's also a writer at the same time. He actually hosts concerts in his garden in order to actually make sure he keeps his cost low. His content is absolutely brilliant. He was offered a deal with Jay-Z's Rock Nation, and then suddenly, when they sent to the actual contract, there was no money in it. And then when he then went back to him and said there's no money on the contract, they then came back to the contract where it said here's $110,000 or $100,000, and he was shocked. And then they offered him another one, and then he just walked away from it. He just felt as if his gut instinct was saying to him that I can't, as he put it, or so, that if this is how you do business, some people say it's just business. Well, whose business? If this is how you conduct yourself, then we can't do business. So I find that these people, they're bringing something new to the table, different ways of thinking, different ways of doing business, and different reflections of what success looks like. And I think that's a positive thing.
And what you've just said there, that amazing example about La Russell, who I will definitely look up, that echoes something we saw in the book that I think you articulate brilliantly around decision making and what we can learn from how hip hop artists make decisions, such as Ice Cube turning down $75,000 to stay in NWA. So what else do you think we can learn about decision making from the artists that you describe in the book?
Yeah, I think that. So if you look at Ice Cube's process for how he actually made that decision, there it was almost like a classic risk management, very, very, perhaps on the elementary side a bit of risk management, but it's a very, very core risk management process, and you always have to ask yourself three questions. We could call it Ice Cube's approach to risk management, or the Financial Conduct Authority's approach to suitability. And so if there are three questions, it just looks at: are you willing to take this risk? Are you able to withstand if this risk goes wrong? Or so that's where risk always is. Everybody thinks everything's going to turn out well. And the final, perhaps most important question is: do you actually really know what this risk entails? So Ice Cube was willing to take the risk of the $75,000 check to sign to Ruthless Records and become a full-time member of NWA. He was definitely, he thought he was able to withstand it, but the reality of the matter was that he just didn't know. So him speaking to lawyers and him going out with the only person who went to go speak to a lawyer and spoke to his partner, at the time he was the only person with a stable spouse, and he took those elements, those moments right there and then, and got good advice. He was told, don't you dare sign this. And he didn't sign it. And he was poorer for it for a short period of time, but became fantastically richer for it in the long term. And he didn't have to go through the emotional baggage that, say, a Dr. Dre, who's again another musical prodigy, he did sign the contract and he paid a very pretty price for it. It went for about, I'd say, another 10, 15 years of turmoil, having to do a deal with Suge Knight, having to get sell himself to almost to what some people call the devil today nowadays, developing death as opposed to becoming his own man. So at the end of the day, they both arrived where they were going to it in a similar way, but they got there through different amounts of pain. And I think that that's the key thing. And again, you can't buy, I think what Dr. Dre went through there too, in terms of his experience and Ice Cube's experience and the differences, it created a really, really good case study in terms of actually the cost of risk and not knowing what you're doing in terms of active risk, and the value of paying somebody to advise you and getting proper expertise. So I think Ice Cube was smart. Dr. Dre wasn't to begin with, but since from that moment to this very day or so, Dr. Dre keeps the sharpest of business people around him, and he's a billionaire as a result.
So I'm so
Both
pleased.
doing okay.
Yeah, they're not on the breadline. We're very thankful to them for it. So yeah, but they also they created great. I think that's the other thing about it with the Hip Hop MBA and in general and the business of hip hop, that these stories really created something to read that we can learn from. That it's the journey of the story of I know people give capitalism a bad word, but it's a journey of the story of capitalism. Essentially, the journey story of doing business. That it creates some interesting stories along the way. And if Donald Trump's got the art of the deal, then I want the rappers to have the Hip Hop MBA. And I hope this book does just as well as the art of the deal. So let's see what we can do.
So I'm so pleased you mentioned Suge Knight there, because we were really fascinated by the description of Suge Knight's journey as a leader in the book, going from someone who's trying to be helpful in his own way, so getting Dr. Dre, as you mentioned, out of a bad record deal, to someone who ultimately has ended up being incarcerated for 28 years for manslaughter. And he really seems like a leader who wanted to achieve his aims by any means necessary, but ended up on a bad path. So what can we learn from Suge Knight about why leaders need to keep on the right path?
Put it like this, there's a similarity running through Suge Knight, Harvey Weinstein, Elon Musk. You see it with quite a few leaders, really successful leaders. Some of them, there's a couple of things going on here. One is maybe not so much Harvey Weinstein in this regard, because Harvey Weinstein maybe he is, he did court publicity, but to a certain degree, there's one of the foremost addictions that we don't really speak about, as particularly as far as business is concerned, and as far as the realm of capital is concerned, is the addiction to the press release. That far too often people consistently do things to end up in newspapers and court controversy or do something else like that. It builds their legend, it builds folklore, it builds interest, it attracts interest in them, it makes them a little bit more godfatherish or so, and then and that's everybody wants to be, and that's it. But the problem with it is that a lot of business people, a lot of business men in particular, you know, to remember there's a very male element to this, because men in particular they grow up as scared little boys, and at the core of them always is that you're trying to break out of that scared little boyism and become the man, and become a man, and become somebody successful, somebody big, and you want to be known and respected for that too at the same time. And as you're breaking out of that very concept, and you're courting the attention, and you're gaining attention, and you're making the wins and everything else that is associated with it, some people, I mentioned Suge Knight, I mentioned Harvey Weinstein, I mentioned Elon Musk or so. Some of these executives start off in pursuit of greatness and start to achieve it, but then they start to immature with age, or immature with success, or become more reckless. Or it might just be the old idiom that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And we're seeing that in some of these people or so. So if you take a look at some of the things that they probably never would have had the chance. Maybe I should have mentioned Harvey Weinstein here, because he's quite a particular dark character in this regard. So there's a lot of assault, particularly of women. But if you take a look at it, the joys of success that they probably never would have dreamt of when they were little boys, suddenly it's becoming real to them. And then suddenly from there, it's almost like you're living a dream. And then you start to realize, start to see it. And I've seen it many, many times. Even if you work with somebody and they get promoted to manager, you notice a very, very, if you can see somebody work with somebody, you're both on the fries together at McDonald's, and suddenly they're promoted to manager, you notice a step change. You notice a degree of like oomph. And you saw it with Suge Knight too. And you saw it with Elon. You're seeing it with Elon Musk in real time too. You're seeing it with Donald Trump. They start to, dare I even say, believe their own hype a little bit. And it becomes a little bit very, very painful to see that these very, very people who are clearly talented at one thing or another just start to believe their own hype and start to become a little bit more immature, a little bit less helpful than they should have been or so, and therefore start to get into degrees of trouble that they probably otherwise wouldn't have done so. So as Suge Knight, who the world met in 1992, Suge Knight originally used violence as a tool of business, that he recognized that he was an intimidating guy who did not want to get on the wrong side of him, and he recognized that he could leverage that to make himself useful to people in the business sense, and therefore hopefully make himself wealthy and make people successful in the long term. And he did that. He was very good at that, because the reality of the matter is that the record business is full of pen and paper gangsters, and a lot of people were getting taken advantage of. And they did need somebody who was going to come along and put some rules down. Suge Knight did that. The sad thing is that he immatured with age, he believed his own hype, and in the end of it, right now, he collapsed. And unless he's very lucky, he might spend the rest of his life in a prison cell. And that's a sad thing to see.
What a great note to end on. Thank you, Nels. Don't believe your own hype. A cautionary tale for all leaders out there. Thank you so much, Nels. That was amazing. Congratulations on the book, The Hip Hop MBA. Where can people find out more about the book and where can they buy it?
It's in all the best bookshops in the world whatsoever. Can I just say one final thing?
Of course,
I really want to
please.
address that last. I did know it was the last question. I like to end on a thunderous note. I'll say this: is that everybody starts off, they're pursuing their dream, they want to get somewhere far or so. You really want to you want to start, so you start off as a nobody, and then you have a dream, and dreams are unrealistic, and most dreams don't come true. But somehow, if you're somebody as a leader, as a business leader, as somebody who just had a blank sheet of paper one day, and then suddenly you put your ideas on a sheet of paper, then you went out into the world and you put those ideas before the world, and you make those ideas something, and you suddenly have gone from literally, you've made something out of absolutely nothing. That is going to change you. And that's going to build a degree of hype around you. It really will. It build a mystique and aura. Just oh my God, I'm so great. I can walk on water. And in reality is you can't, but you're going to believe that. And you see it with so many business leaders, and they start to do what Public Enemy said. And I must point out, it's probably the most useful words. And Chuck D has many, many great words, but Chuck D, Public Enemy, has many great words. One of my favorites is don't let a win get to your heart or a loss get to your head. But perhaps his most useful words for any business leaders, most useful advice, were those three words. Don't believe the hype. Because every single business leader, once you've achieved something once, it's hard not to look in the mirror and think that that it's not a Picasso painting staring back at you, or also think that when you walk inside a room that you're not the most brilliant person there, or it's hard not to mistake your luck for your own genius or your own ability. And with a bit of time, you're going to believe your own hype, and it's going to blow up in your face. You will end up like a one-legged Barry Lyndon if you're not careful. You will end up like Suge Knight. And I just feel that you just need to be super duper careful and really remember that at the core of you, great business leader, Elon Musk, Suge Knight, whoever, also Puff Daddy, whoever else you might be, at the core of you, particularly on the male side of things, remains that scared little boy you were when you're about 9 or 10 years old, trying to say somebody that you like them for the first time. Well, that's who you are, because I know you've broken out of it, but you could always find your way back into it again too. So my advice would be heed the words of Chuck D. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe your own hype, because it's not true.
Amazing.
Thank
Thank
you,
you
guys.
so much, Nels. That was superb. Thank you. And we highly recommend the book to all of our listeners. It's a fantastic read. I finished it a few weeks ago and it is still going around in my head. So thank you so much, Nels.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Abby. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I really hope I write something good enough one day to make my way back here. So thank you.
Oh, we would love that. You're
Love
welcome
to
back
have
at
you.
any time. We'd love that.
So our thanks to Nels for coming on the podcast. As I said to Nels, I've never read a book and had a favourite table in the content. So it's quite funny. I think he was quite pleased that these are starting to see the light. But there are two tables that I wanted to draw readers' attention to. One, comparing the leadership styles of Abraham Lincoln and Suge Knight. Two very different characters from two very different times, but the comparison is well made. And another one that puts Missy Elliott side by side with Margaret Thatcher. I mean, chef's kiss, Nels. Well done.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. I mean, it's a very funny, very witty, very clever book, but there's also such a serious point behind it. And even though I finished the book a few weeks ago now, actually, ahead of the interview, I have had it in my head ever since. It's really made me think about whether we do look at success and leadership in through a very narrow template, which I think we do. And I have been thinking about how I frame success and leadership in my own head. And I think it is a very narrow way of looking at things. And it's really got me to start questioning that as well. So I think it's a great read, really thought provoking and really refreshing and full of really good innovative ideas from the world of hip hop.
And in a week where hip hop is in the news quite significantly with hip hop and rap, with the likes of, Kendrick Lamar and Drake tearing strips off each other with songs over the weekend. So, hip hop, very topical, very interesting. And thank you, Nels, for coming on. Really, really great to speak to him. So as always, we really do appreciate that you've listened all the way to the end of this episode. Thank you very much. You can support the podcast by leaving us a 5-star review wherever you listen to us. It really does help us to reach more people, and that algorithm on Apple Podcasts is even more important than ever. So please do leave us a 5-star review and a comment if you're so inclined. So hopefully you've enjoyed what you've heard and you can share us with your friends.
Thank you so much for listening today, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks with a brand new episode of Starts at the Top.
See you then, and bye for now.
See you next time.